everyone, today I'm going to talk about how you can start listening to classical music and my experience doing so. So, quick disclaimer, the day I was filming this video, I for some reason could not speak English properly, and I just wanted to come out here and say that it was an isolated incident and I could speak with proper grammar most of the time. So, I'm sorry in advance. I make videos all about classical music and being a musician, so please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Also, a side note, let me know if you like this little setup. I've got a few candles, I've got some colored lights going on. I'm just trying to create a cool vibe that everybody can just hang out and enjoy. So before I tell you how you can start listening to classical music, let's get a little bit more into my experience and how I started listening to classical music a lot. I started playing the violin in the 6th grade, but I really wanted to get serious about playing it and pursuing it as a career in the 9th grade, which is about 4 years ago. At the time, I listened to primarily like pop and alternative music. I basically just tried to listen to what everybody else around me was listening to so that I could sort of like fit in, but I also did enjoy some of that kind of music. And in order to get serious, I had to develop a deeper understanding of classical music and also a deeper appreciation for it. So what I did is I decided to fully immerse myself in classical music. I decided to create a playlist with some of the most well-known symphonic works, and I decided to spend 100 days listening exclusively to classical music. I also used the app Gramify to discover lots of different music, as well as Apple Music, which is the subscription I had at the time and I still have. The playlist that I created includes 284 tracks and over 25 hours of music. So it was so much music that I would never get bored, and if I just click shuffle, I could listen to anything within that playlist. The music that I included within that playlist included some of the most popular classical works written for symphony orchestra, and then also a bunch of the big violin repertoire pieces. And after completing the 100 days, I definitely gained a better appreciation for classical music, and I decided to listen to classical music after that point until now, pretty much. And a side bonus to listening to so much classical music is that every time like a piece of classical music comes in an ad somewhere, or if you hear it like at a store, like I could identify it immediately because they all like to use sort of the same classical pieces, and if you listen to them often and you learn the names of them, you sort of see where they pop up in the rest of the world. It's really interesting. So like I said, for several years after the point where I finished those 100 days, I listened to classical music exclusively. So it was basically like an extension of the 100 days, except I added on lots of different kinds of pieces, like more chamber music, more solo music, more contemporary music, just all different types of things so that I could sort of expand my knowledge. I added a bunch of different composers into the repertoire I listened to, and because I ended up going to a high school that valued music a lot, I took classes like music theory and music history and 20th century music, where I learned about even more pieces and composers and things, and I actually learned how to interpret classical music. But you don't need all that kind of schooling to be able to enjoy classical music and to understand it. Classical music can be accessible to anyone, and you don't have to know anything about classical music to enjoy it. The more confined I made myself in listening to only classical music, the more immersed I was throughout my life, and the more my life revolved around it. And I thought that that was a really good thing at the time that I started, and maybe it was because I was getting so much more serious about playing the violin and about being a classical player. But I think over time I realized that it's important to have your own sense of self, and at some point, like, this might be my job, and I don't want my job to necessarily dictate everything I do in my life. So recently I started listening to a little bit less classical music and a little bit more music of other genres, and I think that that has really opened up things for me and opened up my emotions. It's important to include a balance because the way I listen to classical music a lot now is somewhat analytical, and sometimes it's not, but it's a little bit harder to enjoy it if I'm listening too much into it, which is why I need to sort of include lots of new things all the time so that I don't overanalyze the same pieces over and over again. That sort of music has made me realize how music is so different amongst different genres, but how it fills so many different parts of my life. That's where I get my fun from. That's what I've been having the most fun listening to. But I still have many favorite classical pieces, and I still go to every classical concert that I can. Well, the virtual ones right now. But I still love classical music, and I think that it was such a good experience for me to listen to it exclusively for a while because I learned so much about it and it tied in with my studies so much. And now that I know a lot more about classical music and about the standard repertoire, I can expand outside of it and explore new pieces or new songs in different genres. But overall, this experience has had a great impact on myself as a musician and as a violinist. So let's talk a little bit about how to do it, how to start listening to classical music and how to continue listening to it and enjoy it. I think one of the best ways to start is to just flood your life with lots of different classical music, listen to it all the time. And if you're asking, what pieces do I start with if I don't know anything about classical music, and how am I supposed to listen to it, and if you're worried about all that stuff, just don't worry about it. Classical music, it's not super complex in the way that you think it is. It can be analyzed and it can be seen as this completely super duper complex art form, but you can listen to it even if you don't know anything about classical music, and you can still enjoy it because that's what the composers originally intended. They all wanted to instill emotion within their audience, and they wanted to tell a story with their music. So here's how you do it. You could take a similar approach to what I did. Make a playlist. Do it on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube. Just make a playlist. Or you could find a radio station, a classical radio station, where you can sort of get a similar experience. If you don't know what pieces to put in these playlists, that's totally okay. You can either look up different lists online of classical pieces that you should start listening to. There's plenty of lists out there. Or you could also add albums that are like compilation albums of all sorts of classical pieces that will include some of the most standard repertoire, the stuff that you'll hear in ads and movies and TV shows everywhere. And that's like the best way to start because that stuff will probably be familiar to anybody. I recommend looking at some albums like the 50 greatest pieces of classical music, the 50 most essential Beethoven masterpieces, the 40 most beautiful love themes, and other compilation albums like that, and just add all of that into that playlist because that's how you're going to sort of get that foundation and to sort of hear stuff that you're familiar with, but also know like who composed this. Also, you get to hear it by great orchestras, which a lot of these different albums include. Also, make sure to include pieces of all different kinds from all different time periods for all different ensembles. So different time periods could be like ancient, medieval, Baroque, classical, romantic, neoclassical, impressionistic, contemporary, all sorts of crazy stuff. You can listen to things from different time periods because you never know what you might like. You could add some Gregorian chant in there, but you could also add some stuff by Ferneyhough in there. Like, there's so many different options and there's so much great music out there, and it's all written very differently between those different time periods. So look up some lists online and see if you can add stuff from those different time periods. Also include works for different ensembles. So have orchestral works, have chamber works, have solo works, have vocal works, especially if you are a musician yourself and you just want to get into classical music more. Include lots of music for your instrument within that playlist as well, because that's how you're going to get to know the standard repertoire of your instrument. As you listen to all of those pieces that you compiled in that playlist, make another playlist and make this like favorite classical bops or something, and put all of your most favorite classical pieces in that playlist and just like listen to that whenever you want. There's all sorts of classical music and it can serve so many different purposes. So make tons of playlists, like categorize music, do whatever you want because it can be so much fun. Also, a really great thing is to actually watch videos of those performances whenever you get a chance, because not only do you have that oral aspect to it, but you also have that video, that visual aspect, and that adds so much to your learning and understanding of classical repertoire because you're learning about like what an orchestra looks like and how that works. Or if you're an instrumentalist, if you're a clarinetist and you're watching the Mozart Clarinet Concerto played by some famous clarinet player, you're learning to understand how the greats play their instruments. Or like if you want to be a conductor, like watch tons of conductors. Like that's like the best way to learn sometimes. So watch lots of videos of different performers. You're also helping out other musicians by watching their videos and supporting them. So it's a win-win for everybody. Also, as you're listening to these pieces, like if you just want to listen to it and just absorb it, that's totally fine. But if you want to gain a deeper understanding of different classical music, take note of the composers of each piece and the different ensembles, because you'll start to notice patterns between the music and you can begin understanding what certain composers like like to do, and then you'll understand that these composers are similar, and making all these connections, it's really fun. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle. Another listening tip is listen to each piece, especially like your favorite pieces, listen to them on repeat. Like listen to them over and over and over again, because the cool thing about all these pieces is that the more you listen to a certain piece, the more you learn about it and the more new things you find within that piece. So there's all sorts of little things that you can find within each piece that you can learn to enjoy and appreciate. And I find myself doing that with both classical music and like alternative music and whatever, like pop music and stuff, because it's so interesting to notice the little tiny intricacies of each piece. Another thing that a lot of people do to understand pieces better is to try to identify emotions within the piece. Like be like, what was the composer trying to convey here? What was Beethoven trying to tell his audience? What was Lily Boulanger trying to say here? Like find the different emotions within the pieces. This is why I say like put all these pieces into different playlists, because you're categorizing the emotions and you're identifying how those pieces make you feel. And that's like the biggest thing that composers wanted, is they wanted you to feel something from their music. So identify what those emotions are. And like there are some composers that have like really complex specific emotions that they convey through their music at a super basic level. Just like try to identify how that music makes you feel, because that's some of the most fun part about music, is finding things that make you feel a different way. This is different for me, but like there are tons of pieces that make me feel such intense nostalgia, and part of that is because I've played those pieces a lot in the past, but like they just have a very special emotion and a special way of making me feel in my heart. And then there's some pieces that make me feel so happy. They get me so pumped. Like just find those pieces and enjoy them. Also, I talked about this in my two-step video, but make a real effort to listen by composers that are women, that are black, that are Latinx, that are LGBTQIA+. Listen to all sorts of composers, and don't limit yourself to old white dead men, because they still dominate the world of classical music, and there's so many amazing composers that are not them. I will include a bunch of amazing people on the screen that write wonderful music or have written wonderful music that are not old white dead men. Listen to these people. They write amazing music. They've written amazing music. Let's be honest. We've all heard a little too much of Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven. Like, if you explore the realm outside of those people, then you will learn so much more about classical music, and you will also be helping classical music to be more inclusive, and like get involved with those sort of communities within like those composers. They are so underrepresented, and if you listen to their music more, and if you actively support them, you are helping so much to change the way that classical music is heading. And especially if you're not a musician and you just want to listen to classical music because you think it'll be a great thing for you, please make an effort to listen to those composers. I should have said this first. I should have said this at the very beginning of the video, because this is one of the most important things that needs to happen within classical music, is it needs to become more diverse, and it needs to be more accepting of all sorts of people and composers. And I can't say this enough. Finally, make sure you're enjoying this process of listening to classical music. There are a lot of times where I felt like I was kind of forcing myself and confining myself to a certain genre of music, and like I've been listening to exclusively classical music for years. You don't have to encompass your whole life in classical music. Listen to all sorts of music. Like listen to rap, listen to classical, listen to indie, listen to alternative. Like listen to what you want to listen to. All I'm doing is advocating for you to incorporate some classical into your life, because I think it is a wonderful art form. It is a wonderful genre of music, and I think it's worth spreading even more. Especially if you want to have a career as a musician, don't only listen to classical music. Try to include it a lot more within your life, but don't make it the only thing that you listen to. Alright, so finally I'm going to go through some of my favorites, and these will act sort of like as recommendations. So my favorite composer is Prokofiev. Great violin music, great like orchestral music, just great. My very first, most favorite classical piece was the first movement of the Borodin String Quartet No. 2. It is so beautiful. My favorite compositional style slash like era is like the neoclassical and also the impressionistic like composers and eras types of music. I think that those types of music I resonate with the most, and like I love Prokofiev neoclassical. I love Debussy and Ravel, and there's like other composers within there that I think are really, really great. Favorite violin concerto, Prokofiev Violin Concerto No. 1. I know a lot of people like No. 2, but I think No. 1 is the best. No shame. Favorite favorite sonata is the Franck Violin Sonata. It is so beautiful. Like, so beautiful. Listen to it. My favorite symphonies? Shocker, Prokofiev 1, Mahler 4, and Dvorak 9. Favorite orchestras? Recording-wise, I love the Cleveland Orchestra and I love the London Symphony Orchestra. My favorite string quartet group is the Takacs Quartet, or Takacs? Takacs? It's pronounced Takis. My bad. I really hope one of those is right. Their Beethoven recordings are really good. Everything that they record is amazing. I love them. And then finally, my favorite soloists, like, I'm sorry, most of these are like violin related, but anyways, my favorite soloists are Augustin Hadalik and Hilary Hahn. Alright, that's gonna bring this video to an end. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see my face in your subscription box. I love making content like this, and I will be making much more very, very soon. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye!